Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a Senior Engagement Specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we're continuing our series of live stream and radio topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. The purpose of these discussions is to discuss various topics relevant to the NRL environmental and impact assessment. So, in today's live stream, we are going to continue our discussion of the selection of the preferred corridor. Today, in part two, we're going to talk about the results of the corridor selection process. So, without further ado, let's get started. And if we can move to the next slide, please. I'll do a quick review of today's of what we talked about last week. So we're going to talk about the method of evaluating the corridor alternatives. We're going to talk about the corridor options, factors, criteria, and indicators, the weighting and scoring system, the data limitations, and then the focus of today's presentation will be on the results, the preferred corridor, as well as next steps. So let's dive in and do a quick discussion. There we go on the different steps involved in this process, the evaluation of the corridor alternatives. So we start by doing what's called a SWOT analysis. That's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, where we sort of qualitatively look at each of the options, look at the good and bad aspects of the options, broken down into different categories of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So it's sort of a higher level kind of analysis, not objective, meaning not, measuring things in a lot of detail, measuring with numbers, for example. Then we move on to identifying the factors, the criteria, and the indicators for what's called the MCA, which is the multi-criteria analysis, which is the taking all these different considerations, these factors, criteria, and indicators for each layer that's involved in the process and putting them all together, combining them to come out with an end result. So then we run what we call the MCA model, the multi-criteria analysis model. And this is sort of a back and forth process where we tweak different things, we add new layers as they come in, and continue to refine that sort of process. And then we get to the point where we are right now, where we've run the model a number of times. We now have summarized the results of this multi-criteria analysis and have identified a recommended preferred corridor. And then we move on to where we are going to next, which is the open houses to get feedback from stakeholders, the public, and Indigenous communities. And at that point, we finalize the preferred corridor. And if we can move to the next slide, please, I'll talk a little bit about the SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis, we started this in 2021. We had two corridors, the existing corridor west and the existing corridor east. Then in 2024, we added corridors as requested by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada related to caribou concerns. This was West 1 corridor and West 2 corridor. And then in 2025, another SWOT analysis concluded that the existing corridor west was the actual more favorable one. And so, for in terms of going forward with more detailed assessment, the two corridors recommended were the existing corridor west and the existing corridor east. And then, not to complicate things too much, but we have different options. So to go from A to B, there could be two different possible corridor options depending on the inputs identified. So in this case, we've sort of got two groups. We've got option one and option two are in what's called group A, and you could see them. You can see them on your map, F1 and F2, and then we have the other remaining options, through 8, which form Group B. So basically, what we're doing is we're looking at different segments of road corridors, potential road corridors, and comparing them and trying to identify the best ones. And then we take all these, and they have to obviously connect together to get to go from the beginning of the road to the end of the road. That's how it basically works. So next, let's talk about the use of factors, criteria, and indicators. This is the core of the work here. Um, we do the evaluation of the corridors based on these things. And the factors, criteria, and indicators are tied to values presented in the terms of reference. The EA terms of reference, or the IA, or impact assessment, tailored impact statement guidelines, or TISG. Um, these are like the guides to how we conduct our environmental assessment. They tell us what to study and the different ways to conduct those studies. It's the recipe for the environmental assessment. And so these factors, criteria, and indicators are tied to what are called the valued components. The valued components are the things that have been identified as needed to be studied or looked at in more detail, and these are identified by both the public, by stakeholders, by Indigenous communities, by the technical experts as well, too, and government agencies. And so we take these factors, criteria, and indicators and use them to conduct this MCA, this multi-criteria analysis that allows us to compare the corridor options. And all this work is done by computer software. It's geographic information software. Typically, it's like a module of a GIS software package, and it looks at these layers and overlays them all and identifies the best route based on the input of all those layers. So it's all what you call geospatial data, GIS layers, layers of information that's geographically referenced. We go to the next slide. We dive in a little bit more deeply on factors, criteria, and indicators. Factors are like general categories. So, for example, Indigenous land use and interests, that could include things like Indigenous land and resource use. Another factor could be biological environment. And within that, you could have criteria such as caribou, wolverine, bats, fish and fish habitat, and wetlands. So the next question you might have is, what are indicators? Well, indicators are what is being measured and how it is, and it's so. For example, indicators um, for fish and fish habitat would be maybe area of fish habitat that's affected by by the potential road corridor. Then there's another factor, and just to give you another example, there's the physical environment. Criteria would be surface water, groundwater, air, noise, greenhouse gases, and then within that, you'd have indicators that could be, chemical composition of that surface water, the concentrations of the amount of each chemical of certain group of chemicals in the water, for example, whether it's surface water or groundwater. So let's move to the next slide and talk a bit about indicators and data sets. And so again, indicators are things we want to consider, something that's measurable. They can serve as layers in this overlay analysis, this multi-criteria analysis. Another example would be the area of water bodies affected by the construction of the road corridor, or if there are provincial parks that are crossed by the road corridor, what is the area that would be crossed by that corridor? And then we have what you call a weighting and scoring system. So the weighting system is sort of adding priority to the different factors. So If you wanted to weigh technical considerations more than other layers, you could give it a higher weight. So maybe it could represent 30% of the total score. In this case, we've assigned an equal weight to all of the factors, including indigenous land use and interests, biological environment, socioeconomic environment, physical environment, and technical considerations. And then within that, within each factor, we have scoring. So, for example, under biological environment, 40 points could be assigned to caribou and nursery habitat. Um, 40 points could be assigned to fish habitat, and 20 points could be assigned to moose aquatic feeding habitat. So that's just a way of us to more in to more sort of measurably or quantitatively, meaning using numbers, identify how if if one option is more has less of an impact than another. Let's put it that way. Obviously, this is not perfect. If we go to the next slide, um, the direction the model takes is guided by the people that use the model. The model's only as good as the data. Fortunately, we have a lot of data that's been compiled as part of our studies, of part of previous studies, as part of information obtained from various other sources, from community members as well too. Um, some layers are not suitable for the model, but they have to be considered. So they're considered more qualitatively as opposed to quantitatively. And then if we move to the next slides, the next couple of slides just show each factor, the criteria associated with each, and then the weight associated with each in the actual model. And then we move on to the results. So if we look at the results, and that's sort of the focus of today, um, we get these really impressive looking colored maps. This is the result of overlaying all these layers. Uh, you have anywhere from sort of like an orange, dark orange, to a dark green. And going from orange to green is from less preferred. So orange is less preferred, really dark orange is less preferred, all the way to dark green, which is preferred, meaning has less of an impact based on the weightings and the scores and the layers that were input. And remember, those layers represent what people have identified is important for consideration in looking at these projects. So we did these results. We get these impressive maps. It's not just pretty colors, though. There's actual numbers associated with them. And so if you look at the next slide, you'll see a table which is looking at options F1 and F2, which are two different ways of getting to the same place from the same starting point. And you'll see the numbers highlighted in green are the lower numbers. The lower score, the better in this particular case, and the more preferred, meaning the less impact based on the input layers. So that's an example for group A. And then if we move to the next slide, we just take indigenous land and resource use as an example for segments F1 and F2, and we look at those in more detail to provide some insight there. And then on the next slide, we have a larger table which looks at options 3 through 8, which are the Group B options, and it looks at each factor and identifies the score for each factor. So as you can see, this is a very transparent process. The numbers are there, the data layer, the input layers are there, the weighting is there. There's no black box here, so it's right out front. You can clearly see, based on the numbers, which ones have less impact and which ones have more impact. And then in the next slide, we're just looking at segment D4, crossing of the Attawapiskat River. So as you can see, these corridors are, remember, these are corridors. These aren't actual positions of the road. So what it is a corridor that's 2 kilometers wide. So the road, the it's a planning area. It serves as a planning area for us. So the road would sit somewhere within that 2 kilometer wide planning area. And then if we move to the next slide, we're looking at the preferred corridor all sewn together, and with the F2 option at the top as the preferred one, and then all the other preferred options below that. So that is the preferred option that we are taking to the open houses, which are going to occur starting the week of February 16th. That's this week. And so we'll start in Timmins on Thursday, and then next week we'll be in Thunder Bay and Geraldton as well too. So that is the preferred corridor. In terms of next steps, we're going to present these preliminary results at the open houses to get feedback from Indigenous communities and finalize selection of the preferred corridor. We're going to consider feedback from the presentation, and we're going to do a Q&A session and a roundtable discussion, hopefully at these open house events. And then again, as I just mentioned, the idea is to move forward with a preferred corridor, put together a memorandum to document this process and the findings associated with it, and put it to the working group for review and acceptance. So that is the process of evaluating the corridor options and the process we've gone through to identify the preferred corridor. So we hope that was helpful. I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time. But we're open to your questions and comments whenever you may have them. That wraps up today's discussion. We hope it was helpful and encourages you to join us again soon when we discuss topics that follow the environmental assessment and impact assessment process. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. Miigwech, and make sure to look out for project updates on social media and our website. Miigwech, and see you soon.